Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Fish with Historic Beverly, and welcome to another one of our Spotlight Talks. Today, we are going to be discussing the painter Jane Stuart, the authenticity of one of her paintings in our collection, and her history of painting numerous portraits of George Washington. We will also take a look at the work of her father, Gilbert Stuart, as he painted many different American heroes, which influenced his daughter's work throughout her career. With that in mind, let's begin. The general consensus is that Jane Stuart was born in Boston between 1800 to 1808 and was the youngest of 12 children born to Gilbert Stuart and Charlotte Coates. Jane learned how to paint solely by watching her father and mimicking his style. As women were often not considered to be skilled artists, and because of this view, Gilbert did not want to teach her. However, she was a keen observer of her father's lessons when he taught other artists in his studio. Due to this, her father's unwillingness to teach her, and her own keen observations, she was largely self-taught, aside from some lessons from her brother, Charles, who had been taught by their father. Gilbert eventually planned to send her to London to train under George Downey, another portrait painter. After Gilbert's passing, the plan did not work out, and Gilbert's friend, Henry Fay, arranged for Jane to study in New York, closer to home. Jane would go on to hold an exhibit at the New York Academy of Fine Arts. Jane's father eventually assigned her to help him with some of his paintings by filling in the backgrounds as well as grinding the pigments for his paint. This painting you see here is titled Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, courtesy of the Toledo Museum of Art, and was started by Gilbert Stuart in 1818 and left unfinished. Gilbert had painted only the head before Oliver Perry died from yellow fever during a trip to the West Indies. After her father died in 1828, Jane finished the portrait by painting in the background, uniform, and even some of the head. Now, with this skill, Gilbert was asked at one point why he did not teach Jane himself. He stated, quote, "When they want to know if a puppy is of the Newfoundland breed, he will swim without being taught," end quote. This would indicate that he believed that if Jane was going to be a skilled painter, it was already in her blood. Though that does beg the question of why would he teach his sons how to paint and not his daughter? In 1827, at the age of 19, roughly, Jane began showing her work at the Boston Athenaeum. When Gilbert, her father, died a year later in 1828, she continued to show her work in Boston, while taking care of her mother and several sisters as they moved to Newport, Rhode Island. During her life, Jane was never married, but was known as a socialite with a dry wit, spending her time entertaining guests and traveling to Boston from Newport for art shows to take care of her family. Now, let's go look at the George Washington at Dorchester Heights painting that we have in our collection. This painting of George Washington was donated to Beverly Historical Society collections in the mid to late 1900s and was documented at that time as being done by Jane Stuart. Under that premise, it is considered a copy of her father's painting, Washington at Dorchester Heights, the original of which is currently on display at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and was created by Gilbert Stuart in 1806. Our portrait of George Washington is on view on the second floor of historic Beverly's Cabot House, and we will be looking at a comparison of the two in a moment to note the difference in style, depth, and color. But first, we want to look at where this painting came from. This painting, judging by the style and the note on the back, was likely composed later in Jane's life, though there is some uncertainty surrounding this work. As we researched this painting, we discovered that this typed note attached to the back of the canvas, and it gives a feasible level of provenance that is more commonly known as the origin of the painting. However, there are many paintings attributed to Jane Stuart over the years that were not painted by her. Many were created by other artists attempting to emulate her or her father's style, left identified, and later declared as a Jane Stuart. This note, for example, reads, quote, "This picture of Washington at Dorchester Heights was painted by Jane Stuart, daughter of Gilbert Stuart, and is a copy of her father's famous picture, which is in the Boston Athenaeum." During the late years of Miss Stuart's life, when she was being supported in part by the Ladies of Trinity Church of Newport, Rhode Island, Mr. Jacob of 6 Beacon Street in Boston was commissioned by Mr. Joseph Morrison of Baltimore to go to Miss Stuart with an offer of $500 for this picture. The offer was instantly rejected by Miss Stuart, who said she felt almost insulted to have anyone think she would part with the picture for such a sum. After Miss Stuart's death, the picture came into Mr. Jacob's possession, Mr. Morrison having died in the meantime. I purchased the picture of Mr. Jacobs on January 23rd, 1901, with a label that says Edgar J. Bliss, 43 Prince Street, West Newton, Mass. Now, the pressing question we have is this a genuine Jane Stuart portrait? Surely the note on the back gives us enough information to investigate. Edgar J. Bliss, as noted, was a Civil War veteran who lived in the Boston area for quite some time, and there have been several Joseph Morrisons in Baltimore, Maryland, who died around the same time as Jane Stuart. Though some of Jane Stuart's work are signed on the back, and the painting in our collection, as well as other paintings attributed to her, are not, which creates a decent amount of doubt regarding the authenticity of this painting. Without a confirmation from a third-party art authenticator, we can't say one way or the other. We are hoping with more digging we will be able to verify the authenticity of this portrait, though with the drastic difference between her early work and this painting, it seems more and more unlikely that it is genuine. With that in mind, let's draw some comparisons between our possible Jane Stuart painting, Gilbert Stuart's style, and Jane's other works. Here, we will be comparing Jane Stuart's rendition of Washington at Dorchester Heights, as you can see on the left, with Gilbert Stuart's original that he completed in 1806. As previously mentioned, Jane was often commissioned to duplicate her father's work, as he deemed her his best copyist, and later regretted not wanting to teach her himself. These duplications would be one of her more common types of commission work, with most of them being portraits of George Washington. Take a moment to look over both images. Notice the flat colors on our portrait to the left compared to the one on the right. Now, let's look at some close-ups. Here we have some comparisons between the two pieces. On the left is the Jane Stuart painting from our collection, and on the right is the Gilbert Stuart from the MFA. You can notice the difference between the two both in style and presentation of the subject matter. While an adept replicator of her father's work, this possible example of Jane's skill looks to not have the same dimension and depth to it. Seeing them side by side, our painting appears to be much flatter in color and detail. A good example of this is that Washington's horse on the right looks as if it's turning in a 3/4 profile, while in our painting, the horse appears to be coming in from the right side of the painting, very flat and two-dimensional. If we look at the two faces of Washington, they show a much starker contrast. Washington's face that is portrayed in our portrait on the left is flat and lacks the three-dimensional detail in skin pigmentation. The colors in the face lack shadows within the lights and darks and loses any sense of midtones throughout the face. The loss of this dimension adds to the lack of realness of the person being portrayed. Her father was skillful in building up the paints and adding highlights to express movement, which in turn would add to detail. Can you see how the image of Washington on the left is flat and is missing a true jawline that clearly delineates the neck from the head? A master artist, such as Gilbert Stuart, would skillfully work those details into his piece. On the right, Washington has a jawline, and his head sits perfectly on top of a proportionally sized neck and shoulders. Now, let's go and look at some of Jane's other works for comparison. Here we have another comparison between three different depictions of George Washington, all said to be composed by Jane Stuart. Our painting is still on the left. The middle is an 1820s portrait, and the one on the right is in the Mount Vernon collection, circa 1850, of Washington at Dorchester Heights. These are all snippets just to compare the heads of these Washingtons. These earlier works by Jane Stuart show a closer replication of her father's style, likely basing the facial features of one of the many Washington paintings Gilbert Stuart had left unfinished in his studio. The addition of depth, finer colors, and gentle brushstrokes depict a much different style than the painting we have in our collection. This may be an indication of a different artist or possible health complications later in Jane's life that had a negative impact on her ability to paint. Her father had a history of manic depression, as well as her unnamed brother was deemed insane at one point. Additional explanations for the variety of style in Jane's portraits may be that Gilbert Stuart left some paintings unfinished, as he was known to do. This meant that after her father's passing, Jane could take her father's unfinished paintings, which usually only included the head, as we discussed in a previous slide, and paint in the clothing, props, and background. While we do not know the exact date of the painting in our collection, the Mount Vernon Jane Stuart painting is dated 1850 and shows how much more she improved over the years. This implies that our painting, if legitimate, could be a version composed by Jane in her later years, possibly before her death in 1888, when she was reaching her 80s. However, some key issues surround Jane Stuart's exact age. Art historian Dorinda Evans makes mention in her book Gilbert Stuart and the Impact of Manic Depression that a client that visited Gilbert Stuart said, quote, Gilbert recommended Jane as a skilled copyist as early as 1814, end quote. Jane, with a birth date of 1808 at this time, would have been 6 years old. Now, speculation on how young or old she is also noted in the 1850s American Census, as she is marked as being 5 years older than her sister Agnes, who was estimated to have been born as early as 1799 or as late as 1810. Some interviews with people who knew her later in life noted that she looked to be closer to her 90s than her 80s, and always evaded inquiries about her age. Vanderbilt University cites a researcher's findings that Jane Stuart was likely born in 1800 in Philadelphia rather than 1808 in Boston. Even the headstone that marks their burials don't list the exact dates of her birth. Nevertheless, her skill was distinct. Even though she had started out as a copyist, her own style developed and established itself over the years to such a degree that whenever an unsigned painting is thought to be hers, it is then attributed to her. Here we have some detailed examples of her work where you can see the intricacy of her painting skills come to life. The Alicia Boylston from the MFA, Coach Fording a Stream from the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and Morning, Noon, and Night from the New Britain Museum of American Art. All of these show a broad range of Jane's skills as a painter and her ability to bring paintings to life. And with that, we'd like to thank you for coming to the Spotlight Talk on the artist Jane Stuart. If you'd like to see more Spotlight Talks like these, be sure to check us out on our website or follow us on our social media. To keep programs like these free and accessible, we ask that you look into donating to Historic Beverly by texting HISTBEV to 44321 or become a member today for an array of benefits. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at research@historicbeverly.net. Again, that's research@historicbeverly.net. Thank you, and we hope to see you again.